All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Anjuli Sherin. Anjuli, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So Anjuli is a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in trauma recovery, resilience building, and cultivating joy. Since 2003, her practice has been working primarily with immigrant, South Asian, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and LGBTQI populations. In addition to over 30,000 hours of individual and group work, she is a creator of 3 different programs. Anjuli has been widely recognized for her unique achievements in the mental health field. 2007, she received the Emerging Leader Award from the E-Women Network, a nationwide business community where she shared her award-winning essay in front of a live audience, as well as thousands more online. She's also been featured in O, the Oprah Magazine, as a finalist of the O Magazine White House Leadership Award. Wow. Not too shabby. Pretty cool. It
always sounds really wonderful hearing it read out.
That's pretty cool. We'll talk more about that as we get down here. But share with the listeners before we get going, Anjuli, where you're from originally and where you're calling from currently.
Yes, I'm from Pakistan, and that is where my family lives now. And I moved to America when I was 18. And now I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've been practicing here with my own practice since about 2004, 2005.
Okay. Well, let's dive in here. How the heck did you get into this field? And then more specifically focusing on trauma and resilience building. And so I love that resilience and joy, but we'll get to that too. But share with us a story.
I mean, I think the story would be the story of a 22-year-old. At this point, I've been in the U.S. for about 3 years because I came over at 18, but I came over on my own. And I think I got very lucky as a 22-year-old that I had access to therapy and I was able to get into therapy at that time. And I got into therapy like most 22-year-olds probably because I was having a difficult time in relationships and romantic relationships and wondering why. I was kind of suffering inside of them and reenacting certain patterns. And the tool that helped me at that time to break out of dynamics in relationships is actually the very tool that then now, many, many years later, I turned around and built off of to write Joyous Resilience. So that initial tool, which I now call the cycle of suffering, broke open my own cycle of suffering. Like, why am I angry or self-neglectful or shut down or isolating within relationships at that young age? And a lot of that was because of the trauma of, I think, immigrating at that age, not having family here, all the different family dynamics that I think many people have, as teenagers. And I think especially growing up in Pakistan, what that culture kind of brought to the fore. But getting into therapy, realizing that there was a way out. There was a way to actually see why I'm stuck and then an actual way out of it. And the way out was a deep reparenting in some ways of myself. And that reparenting, which I then call formulating the circle of resilience inside of me, that became the work that I did for the next 15, 16 years with clients and became the model that I then went on to teach.
Wow. So say the name of the book again.
Joyous Resilience.
Joyous Resilience. Okay. And you mentioned some trauma that resulted as in part from you moving to America. Talk a little bit about that. Coming here alone?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I will say, and I think maybe many many people who've migrated are immigrants, especially from, I think, non-European countries, right? Because coming as an immigrant from a South Asian country or an African country, like from the developing world, is a very different experience, and I think, than coming from a European country, especially to America. And also, at the time that I came, a few years later, 9/11 happened.
Oh.
And so that completely changed the landscape of being in America as a South Asian. I often joke, it's not really a joke, before 9/11, no one really knew when I would say that I was from Pakistan, where Pakistan even necessarily was. And after 9/11, certainly I never had to explain that again, but that also meant that, like, being a Pakistani, being a South Asian, being an immigrant who was of a Muslim origin was very much kind of right there in the forefront of what was happening around me and how I was maybe being looked at, or the level of safety that I might have felt. So that's obviously some of the trauma, I think, of being an immigrant and here in the US at that time. And then I think there's just, despite the privilege of coming over as an immigrant with, a middle-class background, I'm coming to college and, I'm cared for in that way. I'm not coming and having to support myself off the bat immediately. There's still that feeling of separation from family, from country of origin, from language, from any known community, and the isolation that can engender. And, also being 18 years old, in your 20s, right. First time away from home, having to navigate all of that on my own. And that's on top of, like I said, family patterns that I'm already coming in with, right? Like different family dynamics that may have been happening there. And coming from a country where, despite having parents who are very supportive of me coming on my own, which is still rare, like for a woman of Pakistani origin, her parents go on your own to a different country without partner, there's still, control in that environment growing up in Pakistan. And I think some of that also carrying over that trauma of being controlled as a woman, limitation of choices, things I didn't even know until, like I said, now I'm here in America, I'm having my, formative relationships, and in partnership, I'm starting to see all of that stuff come out as anger or confusion or fear, or just lack of knowing, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling so disorganized? And it's for that I started in therapy. And then from that kind of came the journey of, really realizing there's a way to feel really happy and free inside that I didn't know. And once I got a taste of that, I think that just kind of set me on the path of, I want to give this to others.
Okay. So just quickly, two things here. When you came here, did you come here to go to school? And if so, for what specifically?
Yes, I came here to go to college. So for my bachelor's, I thought that I was going to go into economics, because in Pakistan, the two tracks were like, you're going to go into science or you're going to go into business or engineering or something like that. So I did not know. I ended up actually doing anthropology and sociology, but I had not even, I had no idea that those could actually be paths to go on until I came here and got into college and discovered there's a lot more available. Right.
Okay. So I want to dive into what you're talking about here, which I think is really interesting. This realization that you came to while you were in therapy. It sounds like you got a lot out of it, such that you were able to write a book. But talk more about understanding how you could, quote unquote, feel better, or kind of remove yourself, or work through rather the difficult periods. Talk more specifically about that.
That's great. So I'm going to talk about it in terms of also the crux of the book, Joyous Resilience, right? Because the thing that I wrote about is the thing that then I lived through back then. So the first piece of it was discovering this tool that I call the cycle of suffering. It comes from Stan Karpman, who created something called the drama triangle. And basically, whether you call it drama triangle or the cycle of suffering, it's these three roles inside of us. It's the way that we respond to ourselves when we are under any kind of duress. And the way that we respond to ourselves falls into these three roles. And the way that we interact in these three roles ends up depleting us. So to give an example, if I'm coming in and I'm feeling sad or frightened because I am procrastinating on a project. I want to write a book, but I'm really scared. I don't know if I can do it. Over here on top in the cycle would be what I would call the vulnerable self. So these are all these feelings I'm having about this new project. Over here would be the response. And one way that we might have learned to respond to ourselves there is to actually start to criticize. So the critic, which will go, what are you thinking about? Like, you don't know enough. What are people going to say? You can never do this. Things that then start to obviously demoralize this part. And we all have this. We generally have learned it from our parents or society, or we think it's how we motivate, but it ends up having a different effect. So as I say this to myself, my vulnerable self starts to get more and more vulnerable. Like, now I feel even worse about myself. Now I'm even more scared. Now I'm procrastinating even more. I'm shutting down. And then often we have another part of us, which I call the neglector, who then tries to caretake this by going, either let's just check out, like this is all too much. I don't want to feel this. So here, watch another show, binge on this food, distract yourself with like other people, right? Like who else needs something? I'm too busy focusing on cleaning up this and taking care of that. All of that is again designed to help distract from this feeling. Once this happens, the vulnerable self might feel temporarily soothed. I checked out for a while, all of that. But then eventually I'm faced again with the next morning, oh, that book. Or I see my colleague and they're writing a book and now I feel a bit envious and a bit down. And the cycle starts all over again because I still don't have a way out. So now the critic might go, yeah, see, she's writing that book and what's wrong with you? And you didn't do it and you'll never do it. And now I have to have more of the binging and the addiction and going away and I'm collapsing further. So this is the cycle of suffering. And I think for me to understand that the stress that I was inside of, whatever it might have been, fights with a partner or, feeling downhearted in school or afraid about my first job after I leave college, it was neatly falling into the mouths of these three characters. And that was just so useful, Guy, because at that moment it became not just me. I could see it outside of myself and be like, oh, I'm feeling this way. But the reason why it's getting worse is because I'm responding in these ways. And if I can interrupt that at any point, something might change. And so I'm going to turn over here for a minute. Here is what I call the circle of resilience. And this, no one necessarily taught me. I think it's like looking back at the therapy and then over the 15 years of clinical work, realizing like, oh, the way out. And honestly, for me, probably like the foundation of all good therapy is building the counter rules to these guys. So if I'm feeling vulnerable, as opposed to responding with a critic, over here would be the protector. Mm-hmm. And instead of the neglector, over here would be the nurturer. And so the nurturer, when I'm feeling afraid, right, is the emotional regulator. The nurturer goes, I get that you're feeling really scared. And it makes so much sense. And I'm here for you. And I want to be with you. And I can attune to you. And I mean, even just saying that right now, my body physically starts to, and I see the smile on your face. Like it's universal, right? Like it's the energy of love and compassion. And most often what people have not had access to, and most often why we're coming to therapy is like, because we want to learn that. Whether we know it or not, we're craving that. Our psyches are craving that. And a lot of being a therapist, I think, is helping to build back inside of someone that compassionate, nurturing self so that they can regulate themselves. So that's
just briefly, and forgive me for interrupting, but that circle of resilience, is it that generally, and you can even speak from your own experience, is it that we don't recognize that? We don't believe we have that?
That's a great question. I mean, of course, people are on a spectrum, different people, different stories. I will say for myself, and also generally what I see, especially for people who are coming in with a strong inner critic, people definitely hands down are often kinder to others than they are to themselves. People hands down don't usually recognize that the self-talk that they're doing is actually critical or even abusive. So, I think we have it in us. I think we have inside of us that compassion. I think we're born with it generally as human beings, but re-accessing it and turning it towards ourselves, that does seem to be something that like it is in there, but needs that coaching and nurturing. And of course, ideally we would have received that as children from our parents, right? Like where they're coming in with that. And so it's bringing out that in us. But in therapy, I think it's a reconnection to that, both from the presence of the therapist and the attunement the therapist brings, that's the healing relationship, the corrective relationship, but then also a real building back of that voice inside and teaching how the moment you respond this way to the vulnerable self, it starts to perk up. People start to feel a bit better. It's like, oh, okay, it's okay that I feel scared. Start to pick up a bit, which is the beginning of turning the vulnerable self into the resilient self, right? Because why is a child resilient? Because if I fall down and no one's shaming me and no one's blaming me and they're actually lifting me up, I can get back up.
Right.
So the neglector begins to turn into the nurturer in many different ways: compassion, attunement, self-care instead of self-neglect, not just caretaking other people, but actually realizing we're responsible for ourselves. So tuning back. All of this builds back one strand of resilience. The other very important piece is turning the critic into a protector. And this is the part of ourselves that holds boundaries with ourselves and with others and goes, there's a line. You don't get to talk to me this way, even internally. I get to have limits. I get to say yes if I mean yes and no if I mean no, and pause if I mean pause. I get to make clear requests. These things seem very simple, but honestly, like, I didn't have them at age 21, 22. I mean, I think I'm still continuously learning them, but without them, it doesn't matter how much I might meditate and calm myself, honestly, and it doesn't matter how much exercise I do or how much endorphins I release. If inside I know the next time my coworker asks me or my boss asks me to do something beyond what I can do, or my parent, and I'm not allowed to say no, the anxiety that comes from that, like, you can't meditate that away. You have to learn the skills to be able to respond to that.
Yeah. I really like this. I mean, it's bringing up a lot of thoughts for me in terms of, when you're talking about that cycle of, what did you call it? The cycle of resilience and the cycle of
suffering and
cycle of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, the question comes up, what are potentially we gaining from maintaining ourselves in that cycle of suffering? What are the elements that we're doing to think we're, addiction comes up, right? How are we kind of combating that or trying to deal with that? All these things are coming up. And yeah, you're right. It is seemingly simple, but that, of course, as always, doesn't make it necessarily easy. So let me ask you this, Anjuli, when did you really, you came here, you started moving towards economics and so forth, but when did you start to shift in and say, well, I want to start getting into psychology or become a therapist? When did that happen relative to when you were in therapy and so forth?
Yeah. So let me see. So like 22, like I said, I got very lucky to enter into the world of therapy. I was also already working as a case manager with teen moms in San Francisco. So I was already in the kind of counseling domain, but not necessarily realizing that I myself needed that.
Of course. Who would think,
totally.
Right?
And again, also the cultural component. I didn't grow up in a culture where like therapy was at all accessible or named, in Pakistani culture. And I think even now, I mean, it's getting more available and common, but it certainly was a taboo thing, if at all spoken about. So it was all kind of outside of my realm. However, now I'm in the counseling world and I'm working with teenage moms, and like I said, I'm realizing I'm having a hard time in relationships. Something is happening. And thankfully, I'm also in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a highly therapized place, even back at that time. And so my colleague turns to me and normalizes going, have you considered going to therapy? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of opened it. And I would say within just the first few years of getting these tools and starting to learn how to emotionally regulate. And also, I will say I'm an individual therapist, but I'm also a group therapist. And a lot of that is because a lot of the work that I did was actually in group therapy myself back then. Mm-hmm. And it was in group therapy that I learned how to begin to speak my needs to somebody else and clean up if I had some kind of altercation with them. And also to receive the care of the group and the affirmation, or if there are things I'm ashamed about, you can't heal shame alone. And I would say even with shame, not always just one-on-one in therapy. We need to see other human beings beyond the therapist in a way, hold our story and realize like there's compassion there and like, normalizing. So within those first few years of getting the healing in the group and individual, like for me, I realized like I saw people go from so much pain and so much suffering and so much hardship and like be blown open through the therapy work. And then to really see, I have to say, I think it's the biggest grace of being a therapist or being in healing circles is you get to hear people's stories and you get to see people's rawness and the beauty of them. I think people often think like, beauty is like when we're confident and all of that, which can be true. But I think people's vulnerability in telling the truth and their tears and their grief and even their anger, discharged as a way to love again, is probably one of the most beautiful things we get to witness. And once I saw that happen, there was no turning back. Like I said, for me, it felt like, oh, I want to be a part of this.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love groups and experiences I've had in groups, whether as a member or facilitating. And what you're talking about really, I think, rings true for me too. And what's coming out for me is, you're talking about this rawness, and there's something that just speaks of authenticity, right? It's like we're just letting the crap fall away, and here we are. And it's so profound. And for myself too, that was one of the things, if not the thing, that made me feel like this is the right place for me. Was it challenging for you, Anjuli, to, being from the background that you come from, was it challenging for you to put the spotlight on yourself in a sense and quote unquote work on yourself?
I see what you mean. Like even taking the time to focus in on the therapy and it's interesting you asked that. I will say for sure, I've seen that. I have a lot of South Asian clients, a lot of clients of color, clients from marginalized groups. It is interesting to me how generally clients from marginalized groups often have that coming in, a lack of deserving, and often because the communities that they're coming from do not have access. Their very family members don't have access. So then it becomes that guilt of like, then how can I? And then I'll say, I don't know why, but luckily that actually did not come up for me. I think what I already felt was a huge responsibility, because I was acting out at the time when I first came in therapy. I was acting out in the relationship, acting out in anger, acting out in fear. And so I felt like I was causing harm. So I don't know if that kind of helped me really be like, deserve or not deserve, I have to clean this up because the people in my life don't deserve acting in this way. So that might have corrected it, or for some reason, thankfully, I escaped that. But I have a lot of compassion and just understanding, empathy for the fact that so many clients do come in with that. And I think it's a tragic thing that we're taught that, to be ashamed instead of really, I think in this country and all over, it needs to be a fundamental right, especially for marginalized groups, because it should be a reparation. The amount of trauma that has happened, historical trauma, the very least bit of drop in the bucket would be access to mental health and therapy to recover from that historical trauma,
Yeah.
So.
In this time, that we're living now with COVID and so forth and the pandemic, what are you seeing in general in terms of working with the groups you work with, the marginalized population, as you called it, Asian, Middle Eastern, LGBTQ and I, and so forth? Can you speak? And I know it's everyone has their own story, of course, right, but can you speak to what you're seeing in terms of these populations?
Yes. And I mean, I will add one thing, right? Like the person who's coming to see me, because I'm not working at a community agency per se. So that person, we would assume at that point already has some points of privilege that might shift how they're experiencing the pandemic, as in we would assume that they would have either insurance or ability to pay for therapy, which means that possibly not unemployed or at least have funding. That makes a huge difference in terms of just kind of the like set point of where they're coming in. So I think that question could be different, right? Depending on if we were talking about the person working at the grocery store, who's assaulted by the pandemic in a different way and also probably cannot afford the care. In terms of clientele that I am seeing, here are some things that I think are kind of universal, right? Like one is just the fear. Also at this point, we're 11 months in the Bay. So what I'm calling the midwinter of COVID, like it's the like, you're tired of being tired and you can't quite believe this thing is going to be over. And you're hitting that like second wave of, I think, depression and malaise and that fear of like, we're right towards the end, but what's going to happen? Profound fatigue, from not being able to see loved ones, starting to be some envy or jealousy or difficulty around like the vaccine and who gets access and why and how is this going to roll out. if you're single, then you've had a long road. And if you're living alone, and, depending on your spectrum around risk, maybe you've gone and done some dating, and then there's all of that kind of fear and how hard it is to date during this time. I think for a lot of people, it's been the putting off of the dream deferred and not really knowing when there'll be the chance to have that. On the opposite side, I would say some of the hardest hit are the working parents with multiple children at home. And, now they have been continuously doing the teaching and the childcare and the full-time work. And yes, I feel for you. It's mind-boggling. And then of course the ones who've lost loved ones,
right.
And again, the intersectionality really counts, because generally it's like it is dependent upon race and class, and at those intersections, if you're part of those communities, like if you're Black, you're Native American, and coming from backgrounds that are lower income, most likely you have majority of numbers that who've either passed away or who've been impacted. And so the grief of that, the grief of not having been able to be with people when they passed away, the fear around that. And I think also like political stress and anguish, especially living here and like watching the amount of time that's gone on, like before unemployment benefits have even gotten extended, stimulus checks not coming in, healthcare being precarious, all of that again compounded by race again and class. So I think just a lot of like despair, I would say, in a nutshell, despair, fatigue, and all, like I said, depends upon how many different factors are affecting your experience of the pandemic. And the more you raise those factors, the higher that fatigue and cost.
Let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Anjuli Sherin. The book is Joyous Resilience. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Anjuli?
Yes. So my website, www.anjulisherinmft.com. I will say that everything we talked about today, there's 9 free guided meditations to build these inner circle of resilience inside of you on there. And if you go to my website, you can get access to that. I highly recommend that. And then the book, Joyous Resilience.
Okay. And I'll have both of those linked up at the show notes here as well at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So let me ask you something. You've been doing this for some time. I admire you coming over here by yourself. That's in and of itself is courageous. I mean, there's no way to look at it. But what keeps you going in this field and working with the population that you do?
I love that. First things that come are love and joy. So one is just love, which I think is a profound source of joy. I love what I do. I love my clients. It is life-affirming work. Like I said, that very reason I discovered 2223. When people come out with their authenticity and they work towards reclaiming their aliveness, I mean, it's like, it's hard to turn your attention away anywhere else because that is so compelling. Mm-hmm. So I love that. And then I think focusing on joy particularly, that kind of happened a little bit later in my therapeutic journey, but realizing no one ever talked to me about like what brings you joy and what would like actually work from joy, or how would you express your joy as a person as a part of the healing journey. It kind of felt like if you're not anxious anymore, you're not depressed anymore, you're generally doing well, you're good to go. But it's a whole other spectrum to go, what does it mean to be alive? And so that I ask myself that almost every day, and I look for that in my life, outside of my working life as well as within, and that keeps it just alive. That keeps it joyous, keeps me going, keeps me resilient.
Yeah, wow, I love that. What does it mean to be alive? I love that. All right, let's kind of wind down here with any go-to book recommendations. Obviously, we'll have your book up, but what would you like to share with us, whether it's trauma related or not, or, resilience building related or not? What would you offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think given our times, probably the most important book that I read and I used a lot in my own as research was Reshma Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands. And that is an amazing book, especially I think in this country, right, for like white bodies, for Black bodies, like for people wanting to do the work of clearing up racial trauma. and really, like, I think also as a mind-blowing historical narrative of like, how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
And how is it that, you know, systemic racism kind of infiltrated the US, and like, what is the trauma that even allowed human beings to enslave other human beings? And what is the trauma that then kept on perpetuating that? So I love his book, and it's a somatic book. It's a body-centered book around healing. It's very practical. It's very loving. And I think it's a great guide for our time. So that's the one I'd recommend.
Awesome. My grandmother's hands again. We'll have that linked up here. All right, Anjuli. Awesome. It's been a delight speaking with you. Yeah, I just loved the focus on joy, and
Thank you.
yeah, it's brought a smile to my face. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Such a pleasure, Guy. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.